Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me here today. And I want to thank our witnesses, all three of you, for your very thoughtful analysis. You know, elsewhere we hear a lot of talk about public-private partnerships around infrastructure and claims that they will solve our infrastructure crisis. And so I just wanted to ask a question around focusing on the financing aspect. You know, these partnerships can provide capital to start a project, as you've talked about, but there's no magic here. The money must always be repaid, and the price must always include a healthy profit for the private company. Whether it's increased taxes to pay back a private loan, higher tolls on a bridge, or higher parking fees at the airport, the bill comes due, taxpayers must pay. As the Federal Highway Administration noted in its report in 2010 regarding public-private partnerships, these programs, quote, do not generate revenue, they require it. Public-private partnerships have another problem. The profits are privatized, but when something goes wrong, sometimes taxpayers end up having to deal with the consequences. Bankruptcies, design changes, falling demand, huge cost overruns can eat up the supposed benefits of these deals. So the question I'd like to ask is, since these projects are ultimately funded by the taxpayers for the benefit of private companies, do you agree that there should be strong federal oversight to evaluate the costs, the risks, and the benefits of these programs? Ms. Garvey, how about if I start with you?
Yes, I think there certainly is an appropriate role for the federal government for oversight, absolutely. But I will tell you there are two key pieces. One is that in determining the sharing of the risks, the construction risks, for example, the design risks, those are all assumed by the private sector. So the kind of due diligence that the private sector has to do in order to make that happen is important.
Let me just stop you right there, though,
Sure.
and just ask the question. That is, if that's what the public requires. There's nothing inherent in that requires it, because we've seen the projects that have been the public-private partnerships that have exploded, that have gone very, very badly, and the risks all got shoved over to the taxpayers.
Well, actually, the one that I'm the most familiar with would be the one in California, and in that case, the federal government did I don't want to say very well, but they were able to. The TIFIA program was able to recapture that. So it has to, and I think you're making a good point that you have to be very clear in the contracts that you draw up. It absolutely has to be ironclad, and I would say that that's in the private sector's interest as well. You've got to have a clear contract. You've got to have clear performance measures that are in place. I think we've learned a lot from the early days of P3s, and certainly learned a lot from the Canadian experience as well. A clear, ironclad contract is absolutely essential. But you're right. You need a robust revenue stream. They have to be paid back.
Good. Thanks, Ms. Garvey. Ms. Campbell?
I'll try not to be competitive, but I disagree. And I think it's fine to talk about these things in the model, and isn't it great? But if it's not done right, you'll get extra costs and the downside of the risk. So it really is critically important. And, you know, to go back to, I think, why it's worked, and we've had 10 years of learning, starting from small things, working on hospitals for 10 years. If you don't structure the contracts right, and you don't do and I do think you need a central authority. You can't have everyone creating their own way, however that works, whether it's the state level or the federal level or what it is. You have to have a center of excellence, and I think the center of excellence has to be independent from the owner of the asset that's building. So it's like I say, when you build a house, and in my case, my husband's the problem, not me. But you decide what you're going to build, and then all of a sudden he wants the fancy sound system or the bigger garage or whatever it is, and you have to say, no, I'm independent. I was told that you wanted to build this. We've procured this. We've priced this. We have a timeline for this. If you want to change it, we have to go back to the top of government. No meddling in the back room. And what's more equally important is that the oversight during the process and the selection of the partners and the structuring, and that's why the transfer of the financial risk is to the private sector is critically important. And I know in our Governor General's report, we got the note on, you've paid these additional financing costs that you referred to, and there's no question the financing costs are higher for that entity than it would be if the government was raising the money directly. But without the transfer of the financial risk, you don't get the accountability for delivering. And so when they go offside, they own the risks of going offside.
Thank you. And Mr. Hollis, if I could ask you just to respond briefly, because I'm over time, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry. I will say I would agree with the speakers, and it's evident in the real estate program. You need to have the right people with the right expertise to deal with complicated projects. P3 is a financing tool primarily, and if you don't have people that understand financing, the first X number of deals are going to go bad. And you have to have the right piece, the right place. And that's why it's difficult for small agencies, I think, because they don't have the in-house expertise. And there needs to be some kind of regional entity that can gather that expertise together.
Oh, I want to thank you all, and I just appreciate your emphasizing here the importance of the federal role and the importance of having excellent oversight. There is no free lunch here. Giving in to the temptation of a short-term fix with private money and then paying for it with long-term taxpayer money not only doesn't create any new resources for infrastructure, in fact, it makes the problem worse over time. We need more upfront taxpayer investments in infrastructure, period. Public-private partnerships won't solve that problem, and if governments are going to turn to public-private partnerships, the need to exercise the kind of careful oversight our witnesses have talked about is critical to ensure that taxpayers aren't left holding the bag.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.